Welcome to the e-learning module, Leadership and AI. I, Dr. Pooja Singh Negi, Assistant Professor, Management Education and Research Institute. Under the Unit 2nd of Leadership Skill and Competency, we will discuss the crisis leadership and AI integration. Therefore, the learning objective of this module are firstly, what are the key competencies that require to leading during the crisis such as COVID-19 pandemic? A leader is put to take the test in the time of crisis. So the time of crisis and great stress and drama, a leader's true nature sometimes come to light. A leader's true color, their strengths and weaknesses can be seen through in an instant during a crisis. What a leader can do when the pressure is on display for all to see. Is the leader going to tackle the problems directly, do what's needed to correct it, and own up to it if it's appropriate? What if the leader does nothing, or even worse, acts like a victim and makes everyone else take the blame? How can a leader identify the problem and make sure it doesn't arise again? There are no limits or limitations to a crisis. Whether a company is for non-profit, for profit, public or private, these things can happen at any moment in any place. A typical element of corporate life is the potential for a single crisis to have a multiplicative impact due to the interconnection of the global economy and its political reality. Numerous negative outcomes can result from an organization's crisis, including but not limited to supplier and partner closures and layoffs, a decline in the stock market due to the lack of investor trust, environmental harm and psychological distress. Example include the consulting and auditing services from Arthur Andersen and the US-based energy trading corporation Enron, both of which went bankrupt in the fall and winter of 2001 due to the financial collapse. So, numerous other publicly traded companies experienced problems, some even worse than the Enron scandal, as a result of investors doubting their financial records due to the attention surrounding the subsequent inquiry into both companies. Due to their unforeseen character and the domino effect they bring, crisis events will most certainly impact every business at some point of time. Executive not to act as if there were not so. At the some time in their career, they will likely encounter an organizational crisis. Organizational people will feel the brunt of such a crisis, which is one of the worst and most difficult things for leaders to cope with. A human factor can be addressed before, during, and after a crisis to lessen its negative impact, shorten its duration, and decrease the likelihood of a crisis reoccurrence. An emergency, defined as a sudden and dire situation requiring swift response, is a common catalyst for crisis. The crisis inclusive of the emergency that triggered it, a media that won't stop probing, an anxious and data-hungry workforce, and cutting-edge technology that can't be trusted to be entirely accurate could all make matters worse. So, consider the common types of crises that make headlines every day and how they escalate into the actual crisis. We can take the example of product failure, recall, hazardous material spill, toxic chemical release leak, lawsuit crash, natural disasters, employee violence, strike boycott, executive scandals and defection, act of war, industrial accidents. So basically, crisis leadership is being prepared to deal with and avert unforeseen problems that may arise in an organization. Anything that causes a significant change to how an organization typically operates can be considered a crisis. The impact of a crisis is proportional to its severity and length of time. There are various forms of crisis. Reduced profitability or damage to the company's reputation could come from serious internal organizational situations. Natural calamities and economic downturns are two examples of external crises that can alter market forces and interrupt the supply chain, causing even more damage. In times of crisis, strong leadership is very essential for both short-term response as well as long-term planning to reduce the impact of future crises. Ability to work under pressure, adaptability, communication, problem solving, and negotiations are some of the most important talents for leaders to have which responding to a crisis. When problems arise that are specific to their team, project, or job, middle managers and lower level employees can step up and lead the charge, while upper level executives can assist organization in navigating broader business obstacles. So the question is how crisis leadership differs from crisis management, because management actually force leaders to act accordingly. Although they have a common goal, the handling of complicated business contingencies, leadership and crisis management are fundamentally different. Leadership during a crisis assists organization in developing a long-term strategy to maintain the company's principles, reputation, and public perception, in contrast to crisis management's reactive, short-term actions that aim to return things to normal and resume operations. When companies are aware of the distinctions between the two methods, they can work together to find clever solutions to problems. Think about a business that has a supplier but it is having trouble getting raw materials because of the natural disaster near their facility. So, company's crisis management can then work with its present suppliers to get deliveries back up and running as soon as possible while rationing the company's current inventory. That way, business as usual for the organizational will be unaffected. On the other hand, crisis leadership can do more than just discover quick fixes. They can also assist in identifying new suppliers and diversifying the company's supply chain to make further crises less impacting. So, the crisis leadership model, we can say the first is we need to communicate. In the time of crisis, a leadership capacity to empathize with those impacted by a situation might determine his or her success or failure. Never before have stakeholder put such a premium on seeing leaders in action to see if they live up to the claims made about their caring, authenticity, purpose and values. So leader crisis communications frequently fail to resonate. Leaders frequently come across as overconfident and overly optimistic in the early phases of crisis, and leading stakeholders to question their knowledge and competence in handling the situation. While waiting for further information or choices, people in charge often put announcements on hold for extended periods of time. Second is the resilience in the face of adversity. These effective leaders keep their composure and keep going strong, allowing their teams to weather the storm and they overcome obstacles. Furthermore, they actually win over the enormous challenges without resorting to the dysfunctional conduct or endangering others. So, most resilient leaders put themselves in the shoes of those they serve, whether that's employees, customers, or the larger ecosystem in which they operate. More than ever before, it is critical to prioritize one's own and other people's resilience and well-being. For leaders to succeed, they must set a good example when it comes to their own well-being and provide clear messages about mental health, psychological first aid, and overall wellness. Third is I stand for intelligence. So, business intelligence and data analytics. Every aspect of the economy is affected by the crisis. That is why change management is so important. Managing change effectively requires thoughtful choices regarding debt, labor management, and new technology. So, when we talk about the decisions made by business can be greatly enhanced with the use of advanced data analytics. When sales are falling, the budget issues arise. Business intelligence can be considered a fruitful tool that crisis manager can use to their advantage. Business intelligence and big data analytics can help leaders find out things they didn't know or didn't see coming, like why their sales dropped and how that impact various organizational levers. Data analytics is an emerging field in the 21st century when using analytical tools has become a fundamental part of the business decision-making process, including operations on crisis management. So, exponential growth of data with the technological advancement inspired the creation of devices such as smartphones and the development of space technologies. So, business intelligence is like a computer supported system used for identification and to produce new insights and high quality knowledge to support the decision making in an organization. So, business intelligence is learning from the business experiences, which explains the behavioral approach to using informatics and information technology to make decisions. It is an important part of organizational planning to gain intuitive sights and to execute the operations phase by phase based on these informal gatherings. So, knowledge workers and the data scientists are essential for each company to establish its corporate strategy and planning. Fourth is denoted as shifting the mental model. Leaders often feel they have no choice but to try new things when faced with a crisis, because people with a growth mindset think that their skills and abilities can be improved via self-improvement and practice. Leaders who embrace this attitude during times of crisis often find the change is easier to implement. They are more receptive to the feedback and new information, and they view setbacks as learning experiences. Fifth is the I inspiring stance. Leadership must exhibit transformational and inspirational leadership qualities during the time of crisis, because it fosters resilience in the face of uncertainty, gives solid platform for action, and leads to improved financial performance. Trust is more vital than ever during crisis situations. Leadership and organizations that are grounded in genuine purpose give workers a sense that what they do matters. Having faith in your organization is crucial for employees when faced with challenges and interruptions. Organizational agility and resilience are supported by it, and it greatly enhances employees' capacity to constructively respond to changes and crises. And the last set, S stand for set the recovery path. A crisis doesn't simply go away even when it ends. To make sure their company and its worker not only get back on their feet but also ready for another crisis, leaders can do a number of significant and impactful things. Staff members have been asking their superiors, when will this coronavirus craziness end so that we can go back to the normal or business as usual? In response to the COVID-19 epidemic, the truth is that it will be just another day at the office. Leaders must ask themselves, what can I do now to prepare for when things return to a new normal, in order to be ready for what is often referred to as the new normal or the next normal. So, crisis leadership. The cornerstone of stability crisis leadership means enabling the organization to adapt to any unexpected event and trying to ease its effect by protecting the stakeholders' trust and organizational stability. These crises can be natural disasters, financial recessions, or technological failures. Identifying these crises in their early stage can help organizations to develop the certain strategies to mitigate their negative impact. So, effective crisis leadership can ensure long-term success and stability. As an effective crisis leader, you must possess the following qualities. First, you need to be a decision maker. As a leader, you must be able to move your organization forward, even without any conflicting, confusing, or changing information. Decision making and decisiveness does not mean rigidity. You must be able to quickly decide what to do, even though the situation awareness keeps evolving. Second, it could be empathy. When leaders are empathetic, they can help their teams become stronger. even in adverse situations. So understand the emotional impact of crisis before making any decision. Third is transparency. You must remain transparent in communication and leadership because it can improve credibility, strength, relationship and stakeholders and mitigate the adverse effects on your organization's reputation. Fourth is adaptability. As a leader during crisis, you cannot remain married to one strategy. You need to work constantly, consider new information, consult with people who understand what is happening, listen carefully and be willing to adapt to it. So as we going ahead into the world without the COVID-19 epidemic, new forms of leadership will be essential for thriving in the altered work environment. Some are more apparent than others. For example, digital fluency and crisis management are leadership necessities. However, even the most unseen factors are contributing to the evolution of what it means to be effective leaders. The necessity to make up for the younger generation's social isolation for much of 2020 and 2021 is one of these new unseen demands on leaders. Leaders must now make up for the diminished familiarity with the workings of the workforce and with society at large by providing their followers with additional insight, compassion, and encouragement. Basically, the evolution of leadership when we talk about since 2020 after COVID-19 pandemic, leader has been profoundly affected by the COVID-19 outbreak and the subsequent worldwide impact. In order to be effective in the face of unpredictability, leaders will need to prioritize new abilities and projects and adapt to unexpected changes brought about by 2020's event. Leadership from a distance. Leaders have had to adapt to leading teams remotely due to the rise of remote work, the importance of trust building in virtual context growing nowadays, and it's making us mandatory to reevaluate of long-standing abilities like communication and teamwork. So kudos to the digital age. The pandemic pushed companies to digitize their processes even faster, forcing even the digital laggards to change quickly. To keep up with the competition, leaders have had to quickly adopt new technologies, develop digital strategies, and train their employees to be more skilled. On the basis of uneven ground, business leaders were already accustomed to having their plans dashed at regular intervals, but in the past few years, they have faced threats from every direction, including the COVID-19 pandemic, social fluctuations, and economic instability. Leadership now requires empathy, resilience, and agility to effectively manage crises. Workplace diversity, equality, and inclusion has been brought to the forefront by the pandemic and societal instability, proving that it either works for everyone or it doesn't. In order to promote inclusive environment, address systematic injustice, and prioritize DEI programs, leaders have been required to take actions. Key competencies during the crisis that leaders can consider that they can remain calm and composed. Crisis leadership requires emotional regulations. Effective leaders must have emotional intelligence, the ability to be aware of, regulate, and express emotions, and to understand and respond skillfully to the emotions of others. Emotional intelligence does not mean that one should repress their emotions, but rather express them in healthy ways. The second could be pay attention to the worries of your team, because great leaders have the ability to listen attentively. Employees were inquiring about job security, store closure estimates, and long-term timetables when COVID-19 initially began to impact enterprises globally. Team members must feel heard, even if current leaders may not possess all the solutions to these critical issues. During a crisis, a leader must be physically there and ensure that their staff feel heard and understood. Keep yourself accessible, visible, and open to others within the firm. Leaders need to always have a plan, But be flexible. In a crisis, a good leader will not act quickly. Although quick thinking and actions are essential qualities in a crisis leader, carefully preparation is also essential. The pause, assess, anticipate, act cycle, what McKinsey and company have acquired, and describe these methods of deliberate planning. As a part of cycle, new and trustworthy information is gathered and plans are continuously revised to reflect this information. This is the way how the crisis leadership and leaders work. In order to be both prepared and adaptive, leaders should follow the 4-step of cycle. Like first, leaders can put it down. Don't make hasty choices. Being a good leader in a crisis means pausing before acting rashly or coming up with a new plan. Evaluate. Look at the present circumstances carefully. As the situation develops, gather accurate information and evaluate the effect it is having on the company. Foresee, look for the trends in the data to guess what might happen next. If the government has been extending the isolation deadline, for instance, you should have a strategy in place that anticipates this trend will continue and a contingency plan ready to go in case it doesn't. Do something. Get the word out to your team members about the current plan and then execute it. There should be no avoiding tough judgments if temporary layoffs are to be implemented. Get ready to take step back, evaluate what happened and think about what can happen next by continuing the pause, assess, anticipate, act cycle. Fourth is communicate with the reliable data. When communicating with their team, a good leader would only share verified and credible information. As a leader in a crisis, you must calm people down and base your judgment on evidence. Being as a leader and need to be honest with staff member is an important part of relaying the facts. Fifth, construct and strategy. That is going to be important for leader to be well prepared and have a strategy that actually consider the issues from several angles wherever a crisis arises. So from a leadership or organizational perspective, the lack of transparency on the timetable is one of the most severe effect of COVID-19. Timelines for the first, second or third wave of coronavirus have not been precisely predicted by the health specialists, lawmakers or the general public. Therefore, it is imperative that leaders prepare for any incidents. Each step of crisis can be addressed with a multi-phase plan. An example of a plan with multiple phases in this. Like first stage is like slashing hours and pay rates proportionally. Changes to employee work schedules would be the part of this phase. Similarly, in phase 1, workers are able to keep money making. The second phase involves short-term layoffs. During this time, employees are eligible for recall whenever business pick up, but they will temporarily be relieved of their duties and paid less. Step 3. Making the cuts permanent. In the event of a significant drop in the revenue, firm may have to implement a permanent layoff policies in order to maintain adequate staffing levels. So in this way, we can understand the leadership and its importance at the time of COVID-19. So basically, the initial step for leader is to acknowledge that their organization is in a crisis. It is a challenging step, particularly when faced with crises that do not come out of nowhere but rather emerge from established situations that actually tells the true character. The 22 epidemic and the current coronavirus pandemic are the two examples of similar crises. A slow developing crisis may grow much worse if leaders give in the bias and fail to see its potential. The bias causes leaders to undervalue the likelihood of a crisis and its potential consequences. Concluding of this session, leaders can start responding to a crisis once they acknowledge it for what it is. The problem is that they can't act in the same way they would in a typical emergency by sticking to the predetermined protocols. So basically, these actions often yield better results in the time of crisis because of the dominance of unfamiliarity and uncertainty. They might include anything from short-term measures like allowing employees to work remotely to longer-term changes to company policies like implementing new collaboration technologies that will be useful to have in place even after the crisis has ended. So instead of having a predetermined procedure for responding to a crisis, leaders should practice that attitudes and actions that will allow them to keep their focus on the future rather than reacting in a quick way in the past. Here we take a look of 5 mindset that actions that leader may use to get through the coronavirus epidemic and other emergency. During a crisis, leaders must establish the belief that a top-down responses will engender stability. In routine emergency, the typical company can rely on its command and control structure to manage operations well by carrying out a scripted responses. But in crisis characteristic by uncertainty, leaders face problems that are unfamiliar and poorly understood. A small group of executives at an organization's highest level cannot collect information or make decisions quickly enough to respond effectively. Leaders can better mobilize their organizations by setting clear priorities for the response and empowering others to discover and implement solutions that serve those priorities. So basically, to promote rapid problem solving and execution under high stress and certain conditions, leaders can organize a network of teams. Although the network of teams is a widely known construct, it is worth highlighting because relatively few companies have experience in implementing one. Networks of teams that are effective have certain characteristics regardless of the domain in which they operate. They draw on knowledge from a variety of disciplines because, as past events have shown, emergency that necessarily the involvement of specialists from many different industries acting in their intended purpose. It is not sufficient to just ask experts for their opinions. Experts also need to collect data, come up with solutions, implement them, and tweak them as they go. Furthermore, teams are flexible enough to restructure, grow, or shrink in response to new information or shifting circumstances about the issue. The leader of those teams should encourage open communication and cooperation amongst themselves. So they achieve this in a number of ways, one of which is by setting an example for the team to follow in terms of how to work together effectively. By sharing information and showing that the power in the time of crisis, a leader natural inclination may be to centralize decision-making power and control information that ensure that it is shared only with those who absolutely need to know. So basically, team will more likely to follow if you do the reverse. The leader's ability to provide psychological safety is of the utmost importance, particularly in the high-pressure, emotionally charged atmosphere of a crisis where individuals are understand and anxious to voice their opinions and concern without worrying about the consequences. This facilitates constructive discussion across the teams in the network, which helps them understand the problem and decide how to proceed. So this is the way how the leaders work during the time of crisis and during the time of COVID, and how they actually turn the situation into the successful scenario for that particular organization. So leadership with AI helps us to understand how we can work on the crisis leadership and how it can be fruitful for the organization when managers and leaders are going to work and going to take decisions as per the situations and as per the crisis. That's all for today's Happy Learning.